It does allow for people to be able to access it for 60 days in case people have to leave early, or in case there's some people on your team that were unable to participate. But let me start by, first of all, welcoming everybody. My name's Kelly Lendsay. I'm president and CEO of Indigenous Works, and my associate, Mandy Price, and I will be doing this webinar today. I'm speaking to you from Treaty 6 and the Métis homeland of Saskatchewan. And I think, as we get into this webinar, I think we want to just take a moment and acknowledge what's happening around the world, and our hearts go out to the people of Ukraine during this very, very difficult time. I mentioned, as we get into this, good memories came up. The very first person to sign in today's webinar is my old MBA colleague that we did our MBA with, Brendan Redding. Great to see you, mate. And all the other folks here that have joined us from across Canada. And I think we've even got some of our US and Australia friends here. So today, what we want to do is we're going to cover in this thought leadership training session, our monthly series, we're going to look more deeply at engagement employment with a focus on the readiness and recruitment strategies. Now, you already know about us, but for those of you that are new or non-members that have signed in, our organization came out of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People as one of the, I think, 430 recommendations at the time. Back then, we were called the Aboriginal Human Resource Council of Canada, and we've done a lot of work as an Indigenous organization in the workplace employment space. We've developed a lot of systems and tools. In 2015, we launched a charity called Kachita, which is the only charity dedicated to increasing the human resource and career potential of Indigenous youth, including youth with disabilities. And this past year, we completed a strategy around Luminary with 150 partners, including 80 universities and colleges and 50 Indigenous businesses, to look at how do we advance Indigenous innovation between the academic and the Indigenous community to achieve new jobs, well-being, and economic prosperity. So that's us. What we're going to cover today is really covered in these 4 objectives. You saw in the ad that we did, we're going to cover the 5 principles of an effective Indigenous strategy. We're going to build your understanding of what Indigenous talent's looking for, learn how to assess your competitive advantage, and learn how to convey your workplace inclusion strategies in your recruitment efforts. So these are the 5 principles. We'll shape them right now. Know your labor market system. Think attraction and positioning before you get into recruitment tactics. Number 3, conduct an analysis and systems review of your recruitment tactics. Principle 4, adopt an enterprise-wide approach. And number 5, shape your narrative. So we're going to go through each of these. And I'm going to do the first 3, and then Mandy's going to do the last 2 principles. And then we're going to conclude with just some observations about what's happening in terms of some research, some of the trends and trajectories, and how you can position yourself with the Indigenous market. So let's start with principle number 1, know your labor market system. Now, some of you may have seen this before. This is Census Canada data, 1.6 million people, 4.9% of the population. The average age of Indigenous people based on 2016 data is 29 years of age compared to 40 for the rest of Canada. Fast growing population. Where is it going in the future? So this is a forecast of the population, and there's a low, medium, and high growth scenario. But suffice it to say that by 2041, the Indigenous population could grow to around 3 million people. It could actually be 3.2 million if you look at the high growth scenario. So even with increased employment rates, which generally bring lower birth rates, we are still seeing a strong growth in the Indigenous population and obviously the corresponding workforce. So like I said, what it means is you still have a young, upward mobile labor market that's looking for jobs and opportunities. There's only 2 new sources of labor in this country. It's Indigenous and new immigrants. And Canada is already in a net negative growth market in terms of a labor market. There are changes in labor market availability. There are more Indigenous people available in the labor market. The diversity, again, is being underscored and I think communicated well. You need to look at the urban opportunity as well. 52% and growing are living in urban centers, And as I mentioned, this population could grow in excess of 2.8 to 3.2 million over the next 20 years. So you got to do your homework. Indigenous people want to know the type of jobs that you have. So looking at your workplace, what is your current and jobs, and what's your supply and demand in terms of labor market needs, jobs and skills. So you need to do your homework and bring that information. And as you're gathering up that information about your company, there's three really good sources from Stats Canada in terms of Indigenous populations and communities. You can look at the Labor Force Survey, you can look at the Aboriginal People Survey, the Canadian Census, which provides more local and granular data. But you have to note that when you look at some of these, and in specifically labor force data, it only surveys off-reserve households. So this means that approximately 40% of First Nations people are not included. Sometimes when you look at the Stats Canada that does include reserves, First Nation reserves, you find that they're a smaller number, but there is a small cohort that have chosen not to participate, although that number has come way down. What are some questions that you could be asking of the local labor markets in which you live and operate? Here's some. Who are the First Nations and Métis Inuit in your market areas? Can you name them? Can you map them out? In addition to the political leadership, who are the institutional program directors and leaders? I'm always surprised at how people call me and they want to know who the chief and counselors are. And I keep saying, well, who's the head of the employment system, the education system, the social services? These are the program leaders that are running the institutions at the community level that you want to get to know, because they're the ones that actually implement a lot of the strategies and the partnerships that we're all seeking. Do a quick environmental scan. Look at the social, economic, legal, and political current and historical issues facing that community. Where's the urban market in your assessment? And what is the engagement and partnership readiness of the communities and organizations in your labor market? They will be different. Communities have had different experiences with the private sector, with government, with industry, with their own self-determination goals, and with building their nations. So you need to sort of do and take an analysis of what is their engagement and partnership readiness. So that's principle one. Let's now look to principle two. Think attraction and positioning before recruitment. What do we mean by that? So this is the inclusion continuum, which I hope everybody on this call is familiar with, but the inclusion continuum is this 7-stage roadmap to becoming an employer and partner of choice. It's this systems-based approach that we've created and designed, and we can actually benchmark a company on the inclusion continuum. We use a series of diagnostic questions. We work with teams of people. We put you through what we call a baseline and sometimes a barometer to determine your position, your practices, and your strategies. Now, within this inclusion system, there are 9 competencies that we've discovered that managers and leaders like you and your organizations need to learn. The very, very center one, the arrowhead, is positioning. The first question we generally ask is not about, we don't ask questions about HR, jobs, or skills. We say, what do you think your brand is in the Indigenous workforce or in Indigenous communities? What's your positioning and marketing and attraction strategies with those communities? So the whole area of brand and how you position your organization, even your industry, come ahead of recruitment tactics. So there's your first tip, is you got to start with that question and that focus. The reason brand is so important is that positioning your brand is about your promise. And recruitment starts with brand and traction and your promise. Some things to consider: developing partnerships. We want to develop partnerships, or we want to take our partnerships to new levels. Their endorsement of your company will build your Indigenous brand. Showcase your memberships and alliances with Indigenous organizations and show support for Indigenous businesses. So actively seek out and buy Indigenous goods and services. And number 2, when you join and belong to organizations, whether it's CCAB, NACA, us, CANDO, and others, get their logos on your website, profile them in your reports. You want to show the Indigenous market that you're working with, supporting, and are members of Indigenous organizations, including Indigenous Works and our leadership circle. Establish networks with pipelines such as the ICD holders. This is the Indigenous Skills Employment Training Centers. There's over 300 of them across Canada. You can get a map of them and the holders through our website, or you can go to ESDC. And then there's other groups, youth groups, academic institutions, so build your networks. So when we talk about the attraction strategy, what are some of the messages that you could be including in attraction that will then enhance your recruitment efforts and your recruitment messages? Some of the things to consider are, how are you supporting or investing in Indigenous communities? That could help position you in your recruitment efforts. What supports do you offer for Indigenous people to advance? Indigenous people are looking for opportunities to grow their careers like everybody else, and they generally really seek out developmental opportunities where they are going to get the coaching, the training, and the skills development. What do Indigenous people say about your company? Do you have an Indigenous employee network or something similar? And do you purchase from Indigenous suppliers? Do you support Indigenous causes? Do you have memberships in Indigenous organizations? Use all of those in your messaging and in your recruitment messages to attract people to at least give your organization and your job positions a look. Principle 3, conduct an analysis and systems review of recruitment tactics. So let's say you've done principle 2. 1, you've looked at the labor market, you're enhancing your knowledge, know-how, you've done your homework on the communities. Number 2, you've now gone into a deeper dive on your attraction and positioning. Now you're ready to really look at your recruitment tactics and to do a systems review. And what we mean by this is, when you review them, how do you currently use your mainstream advertising mediums? How do you advertise your current jobs for the mainstream? Are you using Indigenous advertising mediums, whether it's newspaper, print, social media, and so on? Are you incorporating and building social media campaigns? Indigenous youth are just like everybody else. They are fast adopters of social media. And so social media campaigns are generally very, very effective. You can target specific organizations and community partners. You can work with educational channels in your market region and work with those to develop your recruitment outreach tactics and publications. Look to Indigenous publications, youth publications, professional ones, associations, and look to advertise and put your message in there that you are actively seeking out the Indigenous workforce. Here's just some examples. There are hundreds of folks, but if you Google this, you'll see that there are many to choose from in terms of advertising Indigenous publications. Nation Talk, Two Row in Ontario, First Nations Drum in Winnipeg, Wind Speaker out of Edmonton, Saskatchewan Sage. I mean, there are many. So do some homework to search out these publications and include them in your budget planning process. Use Indigenous job boards. This is really a way to say to the Indigenous market, we're looking for you. We want you. We have opportunities here. IndigenousCareers.ca is our job board. It was the very first job board ever created in Canada some 20 years ago. And you, as our members, you get a discount, preferred rates on your job postings. But look, in full transparency, I also want to promote opportunities with my other organizations and friends in this world. Nation Talk has a job board, amic.ca, and there are some others. But do check out Indigenous job boards and make sure that they're actively engaged in your strategy. Unconscious bias. We've heard a lot about this, and I think that it's even becoming more of an imperative to look at recruitment tactics and unconscious bias. And, you know, here's a very, very short definition: an automatic mental shortcut used to process information and make decisions quickly. So you have to look at everything from surnames, schools, communities, and some of the stereotypes and unconscious bias that can come with this candidate selection. This is even before you get to the interview process. And then when you do get to the interview process, making sure that your recruiters are trained and ready and are effectively interacting so that you're screening in people, not screening out. And so they have to be aware of their own unconscious bias. And so this whole area of unconscious bias, cultural competency training, I think is taking on a new level of importance, especially as the labor market tightens up. Whoops. Be inclusive. We all need to be inclusive. When we think Indigenous, think like employment equity companies. Are we also thinking about persons with disabilities? Are we thinking about the LGBTQ community? So the Indigenous population in the workforce has, a disabilities rate of like 8 times higher. How can we identify opportunities for persons with disabilities to have opportunities in your workforce, just like you're doing with other disability strategies? So think Indigenous and disabilities together and try and put those together and work with organizations to provide opportunities. Something like 30% of these jobs, of your jobs, could be for any person with disabilities with less than a $500 adaptation. So there you go. There's a huge economic opportunity for all people with disabilities, including our Indigenous labor force. Think about segmenting the Indigenous workforce and looking at all aspects, including the LGBTQ community. We have done some workshops with Pride Work and others, and you want to showcase your efforts so that you indeed are being inclusive and they are promoting you and your brand and your opportunities to their markets and to their members. Here's an interesting thing that just came out. Now, this is not an Indigenous finding, but it's on onboarding and training. And basically, it's that 42% of job seekers would have stayed longer at a company with more effective onboarding and training. Generally, we find the same, and we have done some research in the past, that Indigenous people look for strong training opportunities, and onboarding is critical. Onboarding is the opportunity for people to learn the rules and roles of the systems, the communication systems, how decisions are made. Indigenous people are looking for that. We have a strong training culture. And since the 90s, we've been pumping dollars, federal and provincial dollars, into training programs. So you actually see a real sort of welcoming environment to training and wanting to take training courses. We used to joke that, you can get 4 or 5 training courses, but what we really need is training that leads to a job. So training to employment. Onboarding, as I mentioned, this is the opportunity to showcase and help people really understand the culture of the workplace, systems, processes, how decisions are made. And this type of onboarding can then really prepare people and build their confidence in the workplace and develop career plans early. I think one of the things that we need to do is challenge all people, but Indigenous people in particular, to say, where would you like to see your career plan and your career trajectory? What are some of the skills and training that you're going to need? Is it language? Is it IT skills? Is it leadership skills? And so put that onus on early so that Indigenous people can see that indeed you want to see them grow, you want to see them contribute to your workplace, and indeed they have to co-develop and take responsibility for working on a training, a career journey plan. So there's the first 3 principles. Now that you've done that, I'm going to turn to Mandy, and she's going to talk about principle 4, adopting an enterprise-wide approach.
Oh, can I get the next slide, please? Enterprise-wide thinking. What is your trajectory for Indigenous employment and engagement strategy across the organization? Here we talk about the 4 factors to consider: knowledge, know-how, strategies, practice, resources, and accountability. We discuss enterprise-wide approach. We're talking about the 5 sectors across your organization buying into your Indigenous inclusion strategies. Sorry, Cal, it's not letting me switch the slide.
I did it.
My screen still shows.
I moved it for you.
Okay, I need 25, please.
Okay. Sorry. Can you see that? Communicate your recruitment goals.
No, I'm stuck on 24. I apologize.
I can only see 24 too.
Okay, here I got it, folks. Hang on. Here we go. Technology and slideshow from the current. Resume. There we go. Do we see 25?
Perfect. I see 25.
All right. Continue.
Thank you, Kelly. Communicate your recruitment goals across the organization in the same way you would communicate your product and market share goals. Are you clear why you want to hire Indigenous people, and where are you hiring? Do you provide your leadership with speaking points they can use in their presentations, which explain why your company is an employer of choice for Indigenous talent? Again, the way you communicate your goals and your recruitment efforts is going to be key in attracting that Indigenous talent. Showcase why you want Indigenous people. How are you inclusive? Your current Indigenous employees across the enterprise may be a great source for referrals. If they are engaged and believe in your company, workplace, they may recommend friends, family, or people they know. Incentivize for referrals, for example, doesn't have to necessarily be monetary, additional holiday time or professional training. So job development as well. Indigenous people like to talk. If they feel secure in a position and enjoy your company, they're going to talk to their friends and relatives. You heard Kelly reference the Indigenous Works Employer of Choice program. Showcase your enterprise-wide commitment, profile your message and commitment to the certification process in your recruitment efforts. So again, this is a program that we've tied in with the 7-stage inclusion continuum, where you can get a certification to showcase how inclusive your organization is on the 7-stage inclusion continuum. Principle number 5, shape your narrative. How are you leveraging your Indigenous employees' experience as a recruitment tactic? Is this explained in your narrative? People generally believe other voices, stories, and experiences. That is why rating systems are so popular. We've heard the terms Google reviews, Yelp reviews, Amazon reviews. I'm sure many people here in this webinar, when you go and buy something on Amazon, you're looking at the rating. You are talking about other people's experience and taking that into a factor before you purchase something, and you have that buy-in. How are you communicating your recruitment tactics and strategies? Again, we heard the Indigenous job boards, Indigenous media, Indigenous community outreach. Utilize those forms of Indigenous media to express your messages. Race relations is impacting recruitment efforts in BIPOC and grave sites. How is your organization addressing these issues, and how will it affect your recruitment efforts? So what do I mean by this? For example, did your company participate in the first September 30th Truth and Reconciliation Day? Communicate those goals. Did you provide opportunity for your employees to partake, listen to webinars, use it as a learning experience? These are messages that needed to be communicated to, again, increase the recruitment efforts for Indigenous employees. So an example here, we have Indigenous grandfather and 12-year-old handcuffed in front of Vancouver Bank after trying to open a bank account. So this is an example, again, of recruitment efforts and how the media plays a factor in attracting that Indigenous talent. Cultural awareness can help to avoid costly mistakes. Starbucks Racial Bias Education Day. Starbucks on May 29th, 2018 shut down their businesses to provide training, to provide 750,000 partners, employees across the country to engage in the onboarding process for their new partners. This training that they invested in, ultimately could result in preventing discrimination in their stores and other costly lawsuits. Finally, your company's response to the TRC's action item number 92, so your corporate call to action in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Your company's response is important to your prospective Indigenous employees. A deliberate and purposeful response is important, requires a dialogue within your community, in your company, and an assessment is needed about what you are currently doing to create a TRC calls to action strategy or a reconciliation plan. So call number 92, we've heard adopt the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People. The call also discusses meaningful consultation with Indigenous communities and employees, equitable access to jobs, training, education opportunities, as well as long-term sustainable benefits to the First Nations communities, education with your management and staff on Crown relations, Aboriginal Crown relations treaties, Indigenous law, as well as intercultural competency training, conflict resolution, human rights, and anti-racism training.
Mandy, whoops, here we go. Thank you, Mandy. So what we want to do now, folks, is you've seen and heard about 5 principles. In conclusion, what I want to do is just discuss with you some emerging trends and forecasts and ideas for the Indigenous labor force. These are some observations and some of the research findings that we've seen. First of all, what everybody's talking about, the competitive labor market. Everyone's looking as reopening happens, how do we get people back into the labor market? There has been some very positive signs in terms of increased Indigenous labor market participation, but we need to, again, invest in, enhance your knowledge capital, your strategy, and your inclusion competencies as part of this recruitment effort. But we are seeing that the market's tighter, rates have gone up, and it's, again, with COVID, so, these are permanent changes, people doing blended workplace approaches. But the really interesting thing about the labor market change is that I think it opens up a new opportunity for rural Canada and for Indigenous people. So people in towns, villages, and hamlets can now live and work from there and work for you, including Indigenous reserves, communities, nations, hamlets, Inuit hamlets and Métis hamlets, and work from their home-based offices, either permanently or on a full-time, on a blended basis. Number 2, start to look at what we call the tier 2 Indigenous talent. I think in this competitive market, there is an opportunity to take people who are tier 2. That means they don't have all of the skills and competencies that you require in a position, but they have the majority of them, and it's an opportunity to skill them up. You can use things like work integrated learning, coaching, mentorship, and internship programs to do this. So again, I think that it's sort of like in sports. You may not have the A team, but you go to the B team and you bring up and train up those folks for your workforce position. The third one is career fit. So there's more and more tools, psychometric tools, I call them, to assess career fit gaps and opportunities. And I think for the most part, these are very, very effective. It becomes a way to economize on your time, your resources, for both the company, the organization, and for the Indigenous job seeker. And the other thing it does is, even if the Indigenous person is not a fit, they're knowledgeable about your company, they have a relationship with your company. As Mandy said, word of mouth, they'll promote it. They'll say, hey, it wasn't a fit for me, but could be a fit for you. You might want to check them out. And so, like I said, I think the psychometric tools are going to be a more cost-effective way to really look at this area of career fit. Let me just share a few more, and this comes from some thought leadership out of the Royal Bank series. If we think COVID created disruption, I mean, just wait. 25% of jobs will be heavily disrupted by technology, and another 50% of occupations are going to undergo a significant skills overhaul in the next decade. So what we need to do is we need you as employers working with Indigenous organizations and partners on future training needs. So yes, we need to look backwards, but let's keep our eye looking forward. What are the trends and changes in your skills, in your jobs, and your occupations? How do we communicate that to Indigenous partners, the ICD.D holders and organizations? And how do we work together with a forward view to incorporate the training and skills needed to have people ready for those jobs? Number 2, our education system, the training programs and labor market initiatives are inadequately designed to help Canadian youth navigate this skills economy. So this is a rather strong statement, but what's interesting is that we need to make sure that we're working with all youth, including Indigenous youth. How are we equipping the K-12 and the post-secondary system to align with the labor market needs? I always remember Mr. Drummond, he was the economist out at TD Bank. And he said, the problem with Canada is our labor market systems are too slow. They're 5 years out of date. We need faster, more reactive labor market data and knowledge and systems and analysis. So, you know, Canada has more work to do. That means Indigenous people can be part of that, some new efforts around more and effective labor market initiatives, data, training programs, so that we're preparing people for these jobs that are going to be disrupted. Number 3 is, we know that the number one competency that's going to be needed by all people is digital fluency. It's going to be essential to all new jobs. And then global competencies like cultural awareness, language, and adaptability will be in demand. So again, think about how are we promoting and supporting and challenging the Indigenous workforce to develop digital fluency skills and training. I think we are doing a pretty good job in terms of cultural awareness, language, and adaptabilities. You tend to see these strengths in the Indigenous communities, but keeping our eye on the skills and competencies that are going to be needed, then ensuring that they're integrated into the education and workforce systems. That's the, again, painting a picture forward on some of the things that we can do together. So folks, we went through a lot of information. Mandy and I covered the 5 principles, concluded with some of the trends. But just in conclusion, like you said, in order to improve your recruitment strategies and your tactics, look at these principles, get to know and really understand your labor market system, especially in your local region, whether that's local, regional, provincial, or national, or even international in scope. Think this idea of attraction and positioning. It's the arrowhead. Think about what's our brand in the Indigenous community, the Indigenous workforce, in Indigenous businesses. So think attraction and positioning messages and ideas and concepts as part of recruitment efforts. Then do an analysis of your actual recruitment tactics. Where are you advertising? How are you advertising? How do Indigenous people see themselves in your ads? These are the recruitment tactics, right down to who screens in the resumes, whether it's online or paper, and then the interview process, who's actually screening people in through the questions that you're asking. So looking for unconscious bias, eliminating or decreasing that as much as possible as part of the sort of detailed systems analysis and review. And then adopt an enterprise-wide approach. This is not just HR. The whole area of recruitment is you need to be talking to procurement, communications, CSR, marketing, and saying, what is the experience of Indigenous people? How do we capture those stories across the company, across our organization, and communicate those in our recruitment messages? So think enterprise-wide, vertically and horizontally in the company, and put that into your narrative. So your narrative is everything. The narrative becomes a way to tell your story, to tell your experiences. It'll bring out the values of your company. And those are the things that are going to catch the attention, the curiosity, and hopefully the interest of the Indigenous workforce to check out your company, your organization, your jobs, and hopefully move forward in the recruitment and eventually the hiring process. So I just want to conclude by saying a big thank you to our Leadership Circle members. 2021 has been a hard year, especially for companies like the hospitality industry, but there's been some unexpected surprises. Our membership growth has gone up 54%. We had many of you undertook consulting activity during this period. We had a 35% increase. We launched the Inclusion Works Employer of Choice program. I see Jay here from Shaw. You were the first to sign up. We've got 5 companies now undergoing the Employer of Choice certification program. The job board, you look at the economy and the jobs and up and down. We again, this was unexpected. It went almost doubled. It went up 86%. New online training that we started around land acknowledgements and Truth and Reconciliation Commission. These quadrupled. So again, I congratulate you. You're investing in the knowledge and the training. And we launched Luminary with 150 partners, 80 universities and colleges, 50 Indigenous businesses to really look at how can we address and create these research and innovation collaborations between the academic community, Indigenous communities to focus on our economic priorities. So I've been a big shout out to all of you. Thank you for making this a great year, and we look forward to a super 2022. So we're going to go into any questions or comments that you wish. You can put them into the chat, or you will be able to go. I'm going to stop sharing here. Great. Okay, so Janine, is there any specific psychometric tool that you would endorse? There's been concern raised in our institution that these may not be culturally appropriate. Good point. So no, I wouldn't endorse any particular one. We're doing some experimentation with some, so it is a relatively new area. I'm not surprised by your comment about culturally appropriate. I think there might be some bias in some of these psychometric tools, right? So I think they are new, they're emerging, and they're all going to be at different stages. So sort of analyze them carefully. Maybe what we should do is start sharing amongst ourselves which ones are effective. What are we learning from the psychometric tools? And if you would like that, and if you sent in your feedback, we would be pleased to organize that and share it back with our larger membership community. So why don't we do that? The other idea I got just before this session, someone said to me, you know, Kelly, we always learn so much on these, but if the members could actually send in, for example, in this webinar, their actual recruitment practices, what are they actually doing? Then we would collect these, organize them into, you know, I don't know, like a storyboard, and then give them back. So you feed in, we organize it, we give it back, and then you look at it like a recipe book. If you see something you like, you take it out of the recipe book, and then you try it. And whatever happens in your experience, you have to then give back to the recipe book. I see people nodding their heads. So I think we got a recipe book, Mandy, in action here. It was actually Mandy's idea too, that this idea of our own sharing circles. How do we create more active sharing circles with practices, strategies? What's worked, what hasn't? And so let's start doing that. Feed that to us. And my team, Paula and Subhash, will help organize this knowledge and bring it back to you. And then we'll start to document. So I don't want to call them best practices. I've never ever liked that term. I like promising practices. And I think promising practices is, you know, they hold promise. There's something to try and experiment with. Okay, Lee says, love the recipe book. Who should we send our recipe to? So what we'll do is we'll send you a link to, well, either one of two things. I need to talk to my team. It might be contact us at indigenousworks.ca. Why don't we start there? Contact us at indigenousworks.ca. And in the subject line, put recipe, you know, so that that we capture it. Oh, you like the term promising practices, Dana? Yeah. I always remember Bill Coons came up with this years ago. And but what's interesting is I think we need to push ourselves to try practices. Not everything works perfectly. It's, you know, we just came out of the Olympics. I mean, you try different strategies and techniques as an athlete. You're trying to push different coaching practices and you learn from them. And so I think that depending on your organization, depending on the folks that you're working with on the Indigenous side, practices have different efficacy. But I like this phrase promising because it takes away the judgment of best. Like you get a gold star, best. Hell, if you get third place, I'm happy with that, folks. I mean, that's a great effort. Or even sometimes showing up and running the race is pretty good. That's a promising practice. So any other comments or questions? We're doing great for time, by the way. I told you we won't go past the top of the hour. We're at 12:44. Anything that any of you saw in the principles that you think you'd like to try at your organization? Here's a question. If we plan on measuring, our organization demographics against the Canadian population, what data source or the ones you mentioned do you recommend? The ones I had in the deck that Mandy and I referenced, use those, but here's where you need to get more targeted. What's the average population, folks? What percentage of Indigenous people? It is 4.9%. But if you look at Thunder Bay, you compare that to Saskatoon, compare that to Vancouver, the regional differences and the population demographics are different. So don't get stuck on 4.9% and go into the Indigenous community in the North and say, oh, we want 4.9%. They'll look at you cross-eyed and they'll say, what are you talking about? We're 60% of the population here. So you have to take the data and look at what is the population demographics in the regions in which you're targeting. And I think this is where you want and can go with your targeting, is that become a little more systems focused, break down the country into these regions, and at least on a provincial basis, and start there. Where can we get more information on sector specific job postings? Can we reach out to you? Sure, you can. So Allison, for sure. We've got obviously some generic information. We did some work preparing for these types of things and things that we've learned. But you can always look at the consulting catalog. We can look at how to design and address and work with you if you want to go deeper on something specific for your organization. One of the things I heard from in this job market where people were losing jobs through COVID, our job board activity went up. And you know what we're hearing? Employers are saying they're trying to get the message out that we are going to come back and we do want you. So it's sort of getting on the offensive early. And I thought, oh, isn't that clever? So they're not waiting passively, and they actually upped their efforts in certain areas. Job board activity was one. And in your job board activity, Allison, I will give you an idea. Don't just list the job, try and describe the opportunity. Be more descriptive. Then it becomes a marketing message. So I think, because not everyone understands the definition of your job, information analytics director. Okay. So try to include some descriptions and a descriptive, as much as sort of the characters of the space will allow, so that you're using it more as a communications and marketing outreach. There's one other tip I'll give you, and we've done this with some companies. In fact, we're doing it with a First Nations group right now. First Nations Governance Center is, you can do what's called educational marketing. So let's say you have a cachet of jobs where you actually put on a webinar and you invite people to come learn about the opportunities, whether it's at your institution, whether it's at your organization or your company. So Mandy, we call this educational marketing. We bring people together. It's a sharing. It's an opportunity to learn. And you get to decide, that company looks interesting. Those opportunities look interesting. I'll go to the next stage. Very, very cost effective for you as an organization, because you're educating people about perhaps a range of opportunities at your organization. And you've created more of a relationship and an educational approach. So we have co-hosted those, because not everybody knows or might recognize your organization. So we have branded those with Indigenous Works, invited people to come learn about your jobs, your internship programs. And it's become a way to build up a pool of people. And then from there, it can funnel down to people that are more interested, and hopefully funnel into those that actually make a formal application and eventually a hire. So there's another tip. So like I said, this topic of recruitment just resonated across the country. We had a great response from our members. We had over 100 non-members register. It was, so we know it's an important topic. And I think as we look ahead to the fall, we do want to start planning to our members. We want to start planning Inclusion Works 2022 online. And part of this is, and this is an invitation to all of you, is that if any of you would like to be part of a program planning committee, we're starting to look at what program should we be offering, what topics. So this is an obvious one, right? It was, well received and people want more information. Volunteer, step up and be part of Inclusion Works 2022 National Conference event to help us, gather insights and shape the type of topics, issues, and a program agenda that we should be bringing forward. So I'd love to hear from you. Again, do that through contact us at indigenousworks.ca. But if I had a cross section of you, it would be much appreciated, because there's just so much to cover. You have to narrow it down and want to bring good value back to you folks. So look forward to having a volunteer program committee step forward.
There's a few more questions in the chat, Kelly. If you want to start at Keith Willoughby's question.
Okay, scroll down. Mr. Willoughby, need your advice, Kelly and others on this call. How do our Indigenous Business School graduates see themselves in organizations that are pale, male, and stale? What can we do to enable transition from education to career successes? Okay, this question came from, he's not male, pale, and stale. He's male, but I got to tell you, Keith, I love it. I mean, look, I think many of these companies who are male, pale, and stale are saying, holy crikey, how do we attract millennials? How do we attract LGBT? How do we attract Indigenous? They're realizing that the labor market has changed. It's more competitive. It's those things I talked about. And so I think the challenge is that when you interview an Indigenous person, the reverse is also happening. They are interviewing you. And we coach students like this. We coach them what they should ask. Are you committed to TRC? I coach them to ask these questions. And so I think how do we help these organizations who are in that category, Keith? I think we should be actively reaching out to them to say, how can we help? What can we do? How do we start to shape that narrative? And for the Indigenous market, I think they need to look a little deeper into organizations. You might see that's, is that truly the organization? Try to look at the career opportunities in that organization, where it's going. And if you can see yourself there, then obviously apply and move forward. But I mean, it's not just an Indigenous issue, isn't it? I mean, women look at this. Is it if it's pale, male, and stale, they're not going to be attracting the best female talent either. So it really is a structural change. But I must say that, I always remember Tony Comper. He was the CEO of the Bank of Montreal. You know what he did? He helped start Catalyst Women Organization, how to get women into advanced executive positions and onto boards. You need men to be part of the women's issue. It's not women to solve a women's issue. You need men engaged in it as well. I always remember leaders like him supporting and launching and seeing Catalyst, take off, this women's organization. So I'm sort of in the same boat when it comes to the Indigenous. I do want some of these. I've got many friends who are in that pale male category who have been great leaders. Eric Newell, who was our founding co-chair. I got a meeting with, I talk to him once a year. I got a call with him next month. Stay in touch with him, right? The guy was doing things. And so, like you said, I think the world of diversity is changing. We need to open up other sectors of the economy. And you remember, folks, look at that 2017 study on our website. 85% of Canadian companies are disengaged. Indigenous is not on the radar screen. It's in the resource sector, the banks, some communications company, you are members, but the majority of companies, IT, hospitality, advanced manufacturing, it's just not on the radar screen. So we need to do more to reach out and engage them. As an ICD holder for larger, how do we get information on national strategies, like World Bank and others, and work with them locally? So Shirley, thank you very much. Shirley, it works for an ICD holder, Indigenous Skills Employment Training Centers. I mentioned like there's 90 of these agreement holders across Canada, and then each of them funnel their training and employment dollars down to the communities. So there's about over 250 of these, and they all have different names. Generally they do the same thing, but some do more than others. But her question is, how do we get information on national strategies? Things like Royal Bank and others. So we encourage the partners that we have and others to actually reach out to the ICD network. Sometimes we encourage them to reach out provincially because they're a provincial organization. Just last week we were at Cargill. We're talking to them how to get to know the ICD network and share and push the information out to the ICD holders. So I think it's a two-way street. The feds used to fund up opportunities for all the ICD holders to come together. They don't do that anymore. That's unfortunate. We used to play a pivotal role in that, but we need to get organized on the Indigenous side as well. And so I think that there could be some new ways to interface with corporate Canada, especially the larger regional and national companies. They generally find the Indigenous side very fragmented, and it is. So we need to find, and we have been pointing them towards the ICD holders to start to share their jobs, their strategies, their outreach, and make that engagement with you. Years ago, Shirley, back in 05, we did a thing called Workforce Connects. We did them in 11 provinces and territories. We engaged over 2,500 people. We brought the private sector, education, and public sector organizations together with ICD holders. I always remember in New Brunswick, 5 people came from Irving Oil. And it was the first time that Irving Oil had met the First Nations people in New Brunswick. First time. But I always remember the First Nations people said to me, there was 11 of them from 11 nations. They said, it's the first time we all sat together around the same table too. So Irving Oil didn't know the First Nations people, and the First Nations didn't even know the 11 nations across the province. That was 05. Today, we did a workshop for Irving Oil. The nations are more organized. It's a really good example of change over what? It's over almost coming up to two decades now. Here's a question: how could an employer become an IW employer of choice? Go to our website and we've got a description of the program. The other cool thing that we've got is the hardest thing about doing any certification program for a company in any area is time. It's not the money, it's time and energy, right? So we've actually created a guidebook. And in the guidebook, it describes the steps you need to take. We actually give examples of how to write up your profiles and how to respond to certain questions. So we actually created more of a cookie cutter approach in terms of what are ways that can economize and save time for you by giving you real examples of how companies have designed and created responses to these questions. So the best part is the guide that we have that's really going to economize on your time. And you can contact us. We'll then set up an orientation, a conversation to take you through it. And then if you decide this is something that you want to get started on, bingo, we sign you up. And we basically go into a formal process to get you on the road to certification. And I think we got time, 1 more minute, and then we're gonna, so thank you, Sophia, amazing information. Thank you so much. As a large organization, practically no. employees identifying themselves as Indigenous. Yeah. I'm wary of tokenizing. So look, you got to take what you got. You got to, whoever, self-identification is still challenging. People don't trust data and data breaches and all this stuff. So you got to do a good job explaining why and how data is used. But look, I'm much more of a pragmatist now. You got a handful of dedicated Indigenous people working for you, leverage them. And be open about your numbers. Our numbers are low, we want to get higher. To me, there's nothing wrong with the good old principle of honesty. We want you, we've got low numbers, we want to increase that. We're actively, doing these strategies. I mean, what else can you do? It's your message, it's your narrative. And people will make a decision. They'll say, okay, you are committed, you want to grow, you want to expand your Indigenous engagement. Yeah, okay, I'll take a job with you because I can actually be part of that. So you're going to attract some people that see the fact that you are at a rookie stage, you're a large company, you're trying to get some traction, you want to get to the Olympics, you're already running the 1 kilometer race. Hey, I'm going to come work here because I can actually help grow this work. So look at it that way. Dana says, count me in. Well, you're all in. You're all great partners. Like I said, from Mandy and I and the team at Indigenous Works, thanks so very much. We're really looking forward to a great 2022. I think there'll be more ups and downs in the marketplace with inflation and what's happening. So, hang on to our horses, as they say, but really excited about the work ahead and the opportunities ahead. Any of those that would like to volunteer for our program advisory committee, contact us. Thanks, Mandy, for putting it in the chat. Contact us at indigenousworks.ca. And we'll see you next month for the Thought Leadership Series. Thank you very, very much from Mandy and I. Miigwech, everybody.
Miigwech, everyone.